22 South Africans are expected to return home today after fleeing the country. The United Nations is estimating that more than 100,000 refugees have crossed from the volatile country to neighboring nations. For more on this, we're joined by Amira Osman, a Sudanese South African professor of architecture at the Tshwane University of Technology. Prof, thank you very much for your time. So this has been characterized as a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. Perhaps we can start by asking after those you know of or you know in Sudan.
Thank you so much for having me and for covering this story from the ground, from family, from friends. People are terrified. The fighting continues. People are desperately seeking access to basic services. People are afraid to move. So, for example, we have family members that need dialysis, that need medication for various serious conditions, and they are unable to move freely in the capital city, Khartoum, in order to access those services. Many people are missing. There are still issues around dead bodies not being buried and certain people's places in Khartoum being inaccessible.
We understand that the United Nations World Food Programme will be resuming the distribution of food in particular, and that's expected to begin in 4 states of Gedaref, Gezira, Kassala and the White Nile. To your knowledge, from those who are on the ground, has this aid reached them?
I really do not know, so I cannot comment on that, but from family members and friends, again, people have lost their income and they've had to leave everything behind. And so what they're doing is that they're staying with either people that they know, or they've had to rent properties elsewhere. Sometimes there are big families that have had to relocate, so they've moved to these secondary towns, to villages, and that is putting strain on family members in those contexts. And as far as I know, the people that I am aware of, that there hasn't been any kind of support. So it's a very serious situation that I can see getting worse as the time is prolonged.
And that's just it, because we have been seeing videos also circulating on social media purporting to be the central bank of Sudan in Khartoum, which has caught fire. And one would naturally assume that this would then also make it difficult for people to access money in order to get some basics from shops that would still even be operational.
Absolutely. So regarding buildings on fire and so on, it's very difficult to know. If you get the story from the army side, you get a particular version, and if you get it from the militia side, you get a different version. So I'm very cautious of even things that have been disseminated on the general media. But the destruction of institutions is very, very serious. Some people that do have money in their bank accounts, as an example, are unable to access that money. The banking apps are erratic. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So in addition, like there are certain levels to this crisis. I mean, for me, first of all, it's the humanitarian crisis. So even people that have resources, that were wealthy off the day that this war started, now don't have access to those resources anymore. So the humanitarian, and you know, one can imagine that this would be much worse off for people that were already very poor, in a very poor context. So the humanitarian crisis comes first. The destruction of infrastructure, I mean, that absolutely has to stop, including the destruction of hospitals, and then the destruction of institutions. This is really a country that's just coming apart in so many ways.
With that being said, Sudan is the third largest country on the African continent. In whose interest is it that in 2023, our continent continues to burn instead of build?
That is such a difficult question to answer. The Sudan is located in a very sensitive area, if I can put it that way. I mean, in terms of the geopolitical dynamics, it's a very complex context. There are many regional powers that have influence on what happens in Sudan. Someone must be funding these weapons and this war. There must be regional interests as well as global interests. Sudan is a very resource wealthy country, especially in the gold reserves that have gotten a lot of attention recently, and to which the militia has access. So someone must be buying that gold in order to fund the militia's access to weapons.
Prof, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Professor Amira Osman is a Sudanese South African professor of architecture at the University of Tshwane Technology. Still to come.